You know, in life, we have a lot of questions that we have to resolve, a lot of choices we have to make. Here's one I bet you might not have thought about. Do you want to be cremated or do you want to be buried? And the other part of that is, do you want to make the choice or do you want to have somebody else make the choice for you? So, if you want to know more about that, just stay tuned. Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Scan FYI. My guest today is Michael Grandi. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Andrea. How are you?
I'm good. So, Michael has been my guest many times, I'm happy to say. But for those of you who might not know who he is, Mike, just take a moment, introduce yourself, and tell everyone about your role at Jersey Memorial Group.
Yes, my name is Michael Grandi. I am a funeral director by trade. I've been one for 26 years. I currently work for an organization called Jersey Memorial Group, which is a family-owned company of 15 funeral homes in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And I am currently vice president of funeral operations within our company.
Okay. Hey, don't turn away from this topic. This is important and it's real. This is real stuff. Everybody has to make this decision. And like I said, do you want to make the call or do you want somebody to make the call for you? I feel like that really is what it's all about. So, it's do you want to be buried or do you want to be cremated? Pros and
Very,
cons. So, where do
yeah,
we
very
start?
It's a very important decision, and one I like to talk about because, people obviously think about all the other things involved, when it comes to services and things like that, but they don't necessarily think of the end result or they leave it up to somebody else. Things have been said that, oh, cremation is cheaper, so we're going to go that route. That's not why we've seen cremation on the rise. We've seen cremation on the rise because it could be, disjointed families, people all over the country. Nobody visits the cemetery anymore. A lot of those decisions are factors, on why families choose one over the other. Obviously, with burial, it's very simple because you just go to a cemetery, you're buried, and that's where you remain. Cremation affords families, a diverse opportunity to do multitude of things, whether they're going to stay at home, go to a cemetery, or be scattered in their favorite, places, or maybe be split and, multiple keepsake urns and remain with the family. So there's so many variables involved. So these are the important and sensitive conversations that we have with families when we sit down with them. So.
So, you know what? We should mention, though, that cremation is trending, correct?
So when I started my career, which was in 1998, cremation was somewhere around 10 to 15%. And as of last year, I don't want to say industry wide, but we saw numbers of about 65%, cremation to burial. So more people are being cremated, than buried. The one thing I want to, stress, and when I'm sitting with families, I always encourage is even if you choose cremation, I always recommend having a final resting place somewhere outside your home or scattering in a cemetery somewhere. And the reason why I always encourage that is because, if you cremate somebody and you scatter their remains,
Right.
that's it. They're other than a birth certificate that's showing that they lived on this earth, there's no tangible place, there's no plaque, whether it's a
Right.
mausoleum or a grave, So maybe generations down the road, somebody's doing ancestry and they want to go to this place where Michael Grandi existed, where they could stand and look at a stone and say, hey, this was my great ancestor. There's no ability anymore. if there's no existence of you here on earth after you're scattered. So um, it's not for everybody, but I always bring that up because it may not be important to you, but it may be important to a generation or two after you, that there is somewhere to go.
Evidence that you were, in fact, on this earth.
Correct. Yep. Yep.
So let's kind of get into the pros and the cons. Somebody is considering, what should I do? Should I be buried? Should I be cremated? There's cost for everybody, no matter how much money you have or don't. I think cost is always a factor. But beyond cost, and of course you just gave a good example, having a physical location, what other things do people need to think about to make a good decision?
So, number one with burial, because again, cremation could mean you're going to have some place to go, or it could mean you're not going to have some place to go.
Right.
With burial, the most important conversations that we have with family is number one, what their budget is. Is there existing grave space somewhere within the family or in a cemetery where they want to go? That's number one. If not, and everybody's buried in other states because, they migrated here, where is that cemetery going to be and what does that look like? Families and people are very particular. I mean, I've gone to cemeteries with families and they see a beautiful tree that reminds them of their childhood home, and they're like, oh my God, I have to be right here, by the tree. Doesn't matter the cemetery, doesn't matter the cost. I mean, something as simple
Right.
as that could be a driving force for a decision. Some want to be close to a road so that the family doesn't have to walk very far to visit, especially if they have, elderly loved ones that may have to, get over to that grave. And some, believe it or not, the very few will actually look at cemetery rules and regulations. Only about probably less than 5% of my families actually are concerned about, well, what kind of headstone can I do? What do they allow as far as planting and flowers and things like that? Because again, you're dictated by the cemetery on what you're allowed to do. They still set the rules. Some are more, liberal than others.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we also tell families look at what cemetery rules and regulations are and memorialization. Some do flat markers, some do uprisen, some do, slants. So those are important decisions with burial.
All right, so that's something to think about as well, which I hadn't really even thought about that either. I think what some people might not think about is whether you're buried or cremated, you can still have a service.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when we talk about the term burial or cremation, and you bring up a good point, Andrea, that's just the end result. That's what's happening at the end, with the remains. So I'll give you, for instance, a lot of times people come in and they say, my mom wants to be cremated. Well, okay, that's great. I know that I'm going to be taking her remains to our crematory. We're going to be cremating her, and I'm going to be bringing back an urn or receptacle for the family. So that just tells me that that's what I'm going to be doing. But again, what are we doing before that? Is there going to be some kind of celebration of life, ritualistic service? Is there a religious institution involved or some kind of clergy? What are we doing around those remains for the family and maybe the general public
Hmm.
to honor that person before cremation? No different than burial. Well, my mom wants to be buried. That's great. Well, are we going from the hospital to the cemetery?
Okay.
Not that that could happen, but, is it going to be that quick? Is it just a graveside service, or are we doing traditional viewing? Maybe again, going to a religious institution for a service. So, burial and the cremation are what happens at the end. We use a term, of disposition of human remains. That's the legal term. So when we bury or cremate, we get a disposition permit. The definition of that is basically, disposing of human remains in, proper, dignified manners. That's what burial and cremation is. That's the end result. Um, so you're absolutely right. There's a lot of things that can happen before those two things come to fruition.
All right, so what would be some things to consider that might make me say, no, cremation is not for me? Because everything is a personal choice, and
Hmm.
I'll tell you, my personal choice was to be cremated because I just couldn't imagine being in the ground.
Hmm.
That's exactly how I felt. I couldn't be in the ground, and I wanted to wind up scattered in the ocean. So my family is well aware of that. But
Hmm.
what might make somebody I don't want no, I don't want to be cremated. That's not for me.
Some people just don't like the idea of it. They don't like the idea of fire or their remains being reduced, to ash. They want to, basically have their remains be, what they call buried intact, even
Yeah.
though cremated remains is still, skeletal remains. I mean, that's what we're doing. But it's usually the stigma about cremation that people don't understand that makes them steer away from it. Again, I am very unbiased, even when it comes to my own family, because I don't like to sway somebody's decision. I'm very subjective. I basically just explain to families the different options and variables that families have when they
Right.
choose to go this route. So if somebody, didn't want cremation, usually it's more or less the stigma around it, or they're just very traditional. Everybody in the family's been buried. We have family plots within the cemetery. I'm going to be utilizing it. And, that's where they're going to go.
Oh, I could, if there is a family plot, a family cemetery, I of course, I totally get that. And I guess for a lot of people, well, that's how they would wind up buried because
Hmm.
there's a place for them ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And conversations that we have, or we're going to be cremating mom or dad, and we're going to be putting her in the cemetery, him or her in the cemetery with our loved ones. And then we're just burying the cremated remains, all intact, all together. That's something amongst our Roman Catholic families, because Roman Catholics, even though the Vatican and the churches recognize cremation, as a Roman Catholic, they're, prescribed way of doing it is cremating and then burying the remains in consecrated ground. They don't want them on a mantle, they don't want them scattered, that kind of thing. So there's sometimes even, religious, preference that basically sets the tone for, what we're going to do with the cremated remains.
All right. And, when we think about cost, and I know, for some people you would say, all right, well, cremation is cheaper, but
Mhm.
maybe you're going to have a service and a big event before or after, which could wind up making it about the same as if it were a traditional burial, I suppose.
Actually, not. They would never. Well, let me not say that. I don't want to say they would never be the same cost, that cremation would always be cheaper. I mean, listen, you could purchase a $10,000 mahogany casket to cremate, and it would be more than somebody that's doing a
Oh,
more modest burial.
that's,
But
that
they're
sounds great.
they're
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's based on a family selection. But I want to say 95 to 98% of the time when we're doing consumer preference, economical burial and cremation is always going to be cheaper for two main factors only that contribute to it. Okay. Number one, you're eliminating cemetery fees. You're eliminating the digging of a grave, with a backhoe. They may require a burial vault. Now, even if you're going to bury the cremated remains, you may spend 3 to 500 for them to dig a grave for cremated remains. You're going to spend 1,500 to 2,000 for them to dig a grave for a casket.
Mm,
Obviously, machinery, more
that makes
labor and
sense.
time involved. So that's the number one cost difference is the cemetery.
Okay.
The number two cost difference is going to be the purchase of a casket or the rental of a casket if you're having traditional service. So you don't have to purchase a casket if you're doing a ceremony or viewing. We call it a ceremonial unit. I don't like to use the word rented because they're designed in a way where the individual gets their own container. So, but again, in layman's terms, you're renting instead of buying, and there's a savings there. So, on average, depending on where a family is burying, we see difference in cost of $4,000 to $5,000 sometimes burial to cremation, which with eliminating the purchase of a casket and eliminating all the cemetery fees and requirements, for burial. So,
Okay.
so that's a realistic answer. It's going to be definitely cheaper if you're choosing cremation, even with traditional ceremonies over burial.
As you and I are having this conversation, I hope, when you're listening out there, you realize that you want to make the choice for yourself and make sure your family knows what you want
Mhm.
rather than leave it up to them, because then maybe you won't get what you want, which is why I always feel it's so important to share your thoughts with your family well in advance, right? Well in advance.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, there's a realistic thing that happens to most funeral directors in their careers, and it happens to us sometimes once a year. And we'll be sitting in the funeral home, and a family that is unbeknownst to us will walk in the funeral home, and they're carrying a box, and they go, I was cleaning out my great aunt's apartment. She passed away 6 months ago, and I came across this box with a name on it, and it's human remains. What do I do with it? Because a lot of times, people that cremate, and one of the reasons why we always ask the family what their plan is after the cremation, we try to give them a tangible plan, because a lot of times they cremate, they're going to make a decision a year down the road, and the remains end up in a closet somewhere, just buried, and that's where they stay. And like I always say, it's generational, right? When you lose a parent, those cremated remains are going to have some significant value to you. To a grandchild, it may or may not have significant value depending on, how long they lived. I've never met either of my grandfathers. If I came across their cremated remains, there's no
You wouldn't have an
relationship there.
emotional
I don't
attachment.
have an emotional attachment. Once you get past grandchildren into great grandchildren, most likely they never knew this individual. And then again, when it's aunts, uncles, cousins, great aunts, we don't know whose house we're going to be cleaning out. They'll come across old remains, and I don't even know who this person is. Could have been a cousin of my great aunt or my uncle. And so that's why we always suggest, what are your plans for them? Are you going to keep them? Are you going to bury them? Are you going to scatter them? But have some sort of tangible plan where they don't just end up somewhere and somebody's holding that urn or box saying, well, what do I do with these? Because there's not that emotional connection to them.
Oh, interesting. Well,
Yes.
I think that, you and I have really just scratched the surface. I think there's a lot more things that could be talked about. And I
Yeah.
encourage my listeners out there, if you have any questions whatsoever, you should reach out to Michael for yourself and speak with him. All of his contact info is in the show notes, so you'll be able to do that. But I hope we gave a little bit of an overview and reminded people, make the decision now or somebody else makes it for you.
Absolutely.
And I don't know about you, but I like making my own choices as long as I can.
Yeah, I mean, these are important ones. I mean, these are end
Yeah.
of end of life, decisions, and they shouldn't be made with haste or with somebody that's grieving, wondering if they're doing the right thing or what would have wanted. It just adds extra stress on, well, yeah, what do we do now?
No, that's never the time to make any kind of a decision in an emotional upheaval situation. No. Well, Michael, thank you so much for being my guest today. Much appreciation.
Perhaps always great to be your guest, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you. Remember out there, if it's important to you, it's important to us. I'm Andrea Tarr, and we'll see you next time on Scan FYI. Bye, everyone, and bye, Mike.
Bye, Andrea.